A $50 million aircraft just got shot out of the sky by something that costs less than a used car. Nobody in the mainstream coverage wants to sit with that sentence, so let's sit with it, because it explains almost everything happening in the skies over Iran right now. For months, the story you've been fed is simple. America strikes, Iran's air defenses get chewed up, the war grinds forward, and eventually the technologically superior force wins because it always does. That story was even true for a while. In the opening phase of this war, the big radar-guided systems Iran was counting on, the long-range interceptors, the layered air defense grids, took real damage. American and Israeli strikes hit them hard, and for a moment it looked like the sky over Iran was opening up for good. But wars don't end in their opening phase, and what happened next is the part almost nobody is explaining properly. Once the big systems were degraded, the war didn't stop needing eyes in the sky. It needed more of them. Surveillance flights, reconnaissance runs, search and rescue missions, battle damage assessment, all of it flying low, all of it flying slow, all of it flying constantly. And that is exactly the altitude band where a completely different kind of weapon takes over. Not a radar system, not a missile battery the size of a building. A shoulder-fired launcher that two men can carry, fire, and disappear with before anyone even knows where the shot came from. China has been quietly supplying Iran with exactly this kind of hardware. Infrared, guided, short-range, purpose-built to bring down drones and low-flying aircraft. And it is working with a kill ratio that should be terrifying anyone inside the Pentagon. Since the start of this war, the United States has lost somewhere around 45 Reaper drones, close to a quarter of the entire fleet it had before the fighting began. The price tag on that is over $1 billion. And here's the part that turns a bad number into a genuinely dangerous one. The production line for that drone is already shut down. Every one that falls out of the sky over the Gulf is a loss America cannot simply order more of. It is gone, permanently, from an inventory that was never designed to be rebuilt at wartime speed. Widen the lens, and it gets worse. Independent trackers following this war put total aircraft losses, fighters, tankers, helicopters, drones, somewhere north of 100, spread across multiple bases and multiple branches. That is not the signature of a campaign that is winning cleanly. That is the signature of a campaign that is winning the headlines while quietly bleeding out the hardware nobody sees on the news. Here's why this matters more than any single number. Iran does not need to win an air war against the United States. Nobody in Tehran believes that's on the table. What Iran needs is much simpler and much harder to counter. It needs the math to bend the wrong way for Washington. Every drone that goes down forces an impossible choice. Keep flying the low-altitude missions the war actually depends on, and keep losing multi-million-dollar aircraft to weapons that cost next to nothing. Or pull those missions back and lose the surveillance and reconnaissance that everything else in this campaign is built on top of. There is no version of that choice that doesn't cost America something. That is not an accident of geography or bad luck with a few missile batteries. That is a trap, engineered patiently, using hardware so cheap and so easy to disperse that bombing it into submission simply isn't an option. Now, before going further, it's worth taking the other side seriously, because there is a real argument here, and it deserves to be heard in full. The counter-argument goes like this. Yes, Iran's cheap defenses are inflicting real losses, but American and Israeli strikes still severely degraded Iran's high-end air defense early in the war, and control of the sky at medium and high altitude has not seriously been contested since. A quarter of an aging drone fleet, however painful, is still a fraction of total American air power, and next-generation drone programs built specifically to survive this kind of threat are already being fast-tracked in response. On this reading, what's happening isn't a strategic trap. It's a tactical nuisance that a military this size can absorb and adapt around. It's a fair point, and it isn't wrong about what happened in the opening weeks. But wars aren't decided by their opening weeks. They're decided by what has to happen every single day after. Low-altitude missions aren't optional extras that can quietly be skipped once they get expensive. They're the connective tissue the entire campaign runs on, the eyes that make every other strike possible. And that is precisely the layer where cheap, dispersed, hard-to-trace weapons do the most damage for the least cost. A shift that's small, sitting underneath a much bigger and more impressive-looking air war, is exactly the kind of thing that decides how long a war actually lasts, long after the opening week headlines have been forgotten. So here's what to actually watch in the weeks ahead, because the headlines are going to keep telling you who struck who today, and that isn't where this gets decided. Watch whether the pace of these low-altitude losses speeds up or levels off, because a flattening curve means American tactics are adapting, and an accelerating one means the network supplying these weapons is spreading faster than anyone can counter it. Watch what the Pentagon actually orders to replace what's being lost, because a hard pivot toward cheaper, disposable, swarm-capable drones instead of expensive sensor-heavy platforms is the quiet admission that the current approach can't hold. Watch shipping traffic through the Strait, because every ship that isn't moving through it represents surveillance flights still happening over exactly the water where this threat lives. And watch who blinks first at the negotiating table and how they frame it, because a side that believes time and attrition are on its side doesn't rush toward a deal, it waits. Nobody is going to tell you America lost air superiority over Iran, and in the way people usually mean that phrase, it hasn't. What's actually happening is stranger, and in some ways more dangerous than an outright defeat. The most advanced air force in the history of the world is being ground down, mission by a weapon so small it fits on someone's back and costs less than the fuel burned, flying the plane it just brought down. China didn't have to send Iran a single fighter jet to change the shape of this war. It sent something smaller, cheaper, and far harder to see coming, and that is exactly why it's working.